Hey, my name is Chelsea Fagan, and I'm the founder and CEO of The Financial Diet, a totally independently owned and operated company of women who love to talk about money. Welcome to The Financial Confessions, a weekly show where we talk to people about their personal finances, their professional industry, and how money shapes their lives. You can listen to or watch new episodes of The Financial Confessions every week on YouTube or your preferred streaming platform. You can also support TFD and get exclusive access to our entire catalog of ad-free bonus videos, workshops, Discord community, our book club, and more by joining our members-only community on Patreon or YouTube. Our 2024 goal is to be primarily supported by our incredible community, and joining our membership program is the best way to do that. Enjoy the episode. Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode. I knew, I should say, that when we were doing a season entirely of real people with real problems, and hopefully who are coming to some sort of real solutions, but in general, people who are dealing with stuff that you don't necessarily see represented in media every day, but which are hugely impactful financially. One of the people, or the types of people rather, that I knew that I wanted to speak to are people who have had a lot of contact with our healthcare system. Now, obviously, we kicked off the season with an amazing conversation with an ICU nurse, and we'll link you guys to that in the description. Ryan Parrish, one of my favorite interviews I've done in a while. But that's only one side of the healthcare industry. The other side for many, if not most of us who will come in contact, is as a patient. My guest today is someone who was diagnosed with cancer at a very young age, and as a result of that was thrown sort of headfirst into the deep end of the American medical system. And although, of course, we are so lucky and grateful to see her here well with us today, it also was both a huge personal and financial journey, and one that she was kind enough to accept to talk about from a sort of 360 perspective, because as I'm sure anyone who has had unexpected medical issues knows, it's often just as devastating financially as it is in all of the other ways. Without further ado, I want to welcome my guest today, Olivia Leow.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very, very good. Thank you again for joining us. And if you wouldn't mind kicking us off by just sharing what exactly happened with your diagnosis, your treatment, give us sort of your story, if you will.
Sure. So, Father's Day of 2021, I have two young boys. They were, let's see, 3 and 5 at the time. We were driving. I live in Nashville. We were driving out to a suburb of Franklin to a friend's pool. And suddenly I couldn't see the sides of the road. And I had very good vision otherwise. And so that was new for me. And by the time we got there, it was probably about a 30-minute drive. I couldn't see the sides of the road. I should have stopped driving, but I didn't. And I also had a really bad headache. And so we got there. I told my friend about it. It kind of got better. So we went to the pool. And this was, if you are there moms out there, this was like the hardest pool season because they had graduated out of floaties or puddle jumpers and were now just in the pool. And so they weren't great swimmers. So I was very focused on that. I'd kind of forgotten about what happened earlier. And then suddenly my hands went numb. One at a time, they went very numb in the pool. And I was like, something is happening in my body. So we kind of wrap up the pool day. We go back to my friend's house. Our husbands had been playing in a Father's Day golf tournament. They came back. And as I was telling them about what happened with my vision, with my hands, it happened again. So my vision, I lost my peripheral vision. And then my hand went numb again. And we were like, okay, something is going on. And we did what, every doctor in America says not to do. We Googled it. And WebMD, I think maybe for the only time, said, oh, you've got a migraine. And I'd never had a migraine before. So I was like, oh, okay. Not a big deal. We go home. I go to work the next day and I tell a few people about it. I'd had thyroid cancer previously, right after my oldest was born. And they adjust my thyroid medication often. And I just had it adjusted. So I called them and I was like, could this possibly be related to what's happening? And they kind of laughed and were like, no, please go to the emergency room. And I was like, no. I've got, the internet says I have a migraine, so I'll go to work. And I went to work and I told a few other people. And then had a kind of a full body cold sweat. And I knew like my body is trying to tell me something. And enough people have told me to go to the emergency room. And so I left in work attire, had my laptop with me, drove myself to an emergency room in Nashville, kind of felt silly about it, checked in and, went through the whole emergency room process, which is wild, by the way. I've been in an emergency room in the emergency room a couple of times since then. And it is, I mean, hats off to people who work there. There are some crazy things happening in an emergency room. And I saw the doctor. He said, you know what, let's do an MRI just to be sure. I didn't really know what that was. Let's do a chest x-ray. I was like, that sounds fun, whatever. And I kind of joked with him at the time of like, what does an MRI run you? Like, is this going to be covered by my insurance? And the answer to that is nobody knows. Nobody ever knows in the moment. So I go do the MRI, I do the chest x-ray. I'm in this little ER room by myself for a long time afterwards. I'm joking with my husband and with some friends that they've forgotten about the girl who came to the ER with a migraine. Like, I'll be here all night, but only because they've forgotten about me. And the ER doctor came in and he has a printout and he sits down and he says, I've got good news and bad news. And the good news is that your heart is okay, which I was not concerned about my heart. So that was good news, I guess. And the bad news is they found something on your brain. And it was, I was there by myself because my husband was home with the boys. My parent are, we don't have any other family members that live here. And it was like a movie. I stopped hearing what he was saying. He read the whole printout of what it could possibly be on my brain. And there was this long list of scary things. And I looked at him after he read it and I said, I don't know what you just said. I didn't hear anything you just said. And he said, okay, I'm going to read it again. And he read the whole thing again. And I'm, maybe said some bad words that I'm sure are not allowed on this podcast, but he said, yep, that's the right response. And my mind just started going of like, what do you mean there's something on my brain? It could be a brain tumor. It could have been meningitis, encephalitis. I could have MS. And he left and I was in this room by myself and I called my husband and that is when I just lost it. And the doctor says, we're going to admit you to the hospital. And I said, no. I live around the corner. I'll come back. I can come back and do tests, but I don't need to stay here. Like, I've got to go make dinner for my kids. That's what my plan was. It was Monday night. And, I did stay there. I stayed there for 6 days. I did every test under the sun. I called my husband and of course he was trying to keep it together because he was with our children. And then maybe the worst, he knew I was, I'd been talking to him. He knew I was in the emergency room, but maybe the worst was calling my mom and my parents because I had not told them I was in the emergency room. And I called my mom who had just had knee surgery. I'd just been down in Mississippi with her. And I had to say, she was all cheery when she answered the phone. And I had to say, Mom, I'm in the emergency room and they found something on my brain. And that was horrible. Like it's hard to do that to people, it's hard to shock them with something terrible. And I had to do that over and over again for a while. And anyway, so I'll stop there. I can tell you about all the days that I spent in the hospital, but it was a rough road to start for sure.
And you mentioned you had already had cancer prior.
Right after I had our oldest, he was 4 months old. I got diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And thyroid cancer, the kind of thyroid cancer I had was not a big deal. It feels like a big deal. It feels like a big deal. And it is a big deal every time somebody says you have cancer. But I had a very low level cancer that was very curable and treatable. I had to have my thyroid removed and it was tough. I mean, I had a 6-week-old and I had to go to the hospital and figure all of that out and spend the night in the hospital away from him. and at the time I thought, this is the worst thing that has happened, that will happen to me. This is horrible. And now I think of it like as not a big deal, but I had been through that process before of being diagnosed with a cancer and having surgery and having I didn't have to have treatments after that one. So, but yeah, this was the second time around and it was a big one.
I mean, I know you alluded to it, but it certainly must be the first time in history that WebMD was like, "Girl, it's fine," and it's like, actually, you do have cancer.
That's
Um,
right. Go ahead to work the next day. No big deal.
can you just tell us, just logistically, what the process was going from you have something on your brain to it's actually a tumor?
Yeah. So I was admitted to the hospital that night. I called my friend Molly because Robert was with the boys and said, again, just shocking phone calls to all the people that I love. I'm in the ER. There's something on my brain. I need somebody to be here with me. So she came and until Robert could get there, Robert's parents came to town and took over the kids. But I was in the hospital for 6 days. I had every scan imaginable. I had a CT scan, full body. I had a lumbar puncture, which I would rank that right up there at the top of the worst things you can do. It's like a spinal tap. I had a brain biopsy before I left. And they were really, I think this is what happens a lot in the medical field. There is like a process of elimination of what it is. So they eliminated MS and encephalitis and meningitis, which is more of an infection situation. And then they did some blood work and some pathology results on the biopsy. And I was there, I was there Monday to Saturday, I think, in the hospital. And by Wednesday of the next week, the team was calling with the results. And so I'll never forget, we were at swim lessons with the boys and they finally they said they'd call on Wednesday. And this was Wednesday at like 6:30 p.m. So it was a mess for however long that was. And I get the call at swim lessons and Robert and I walk outside and get in his car and they say, you have an astrocytoma, which is a malignant brain tumor. It's stage 2. It's got all of these mutations and all of these things. And then he said, you will need surgery to remove it and you'll need to be awake during the surgery. And I was like, what? Excuse me, what? And we went from there. So he was right. I did need an awake craniotomy, which means they are removing part of your brain while you are awake. After that, I did 28 treatments, radiation treatments on my brain. And then I did 6 months of an oral chemo. So it was a year from when I was in the ER until that last chemo treatment.
And as of today, are you cancer free?
Yes, they don't. My care team does not use the word cancer free. I like to use the word cancer free, but they say that it is stable.
Okay.
And every time the neuro-oncologist says I'm stable, my husband chuckles a little. I'm like, I am stable. But yes, it is a cancer that has a high instance of recurrence. And so this may happen again, but for now I'm in good shape.
Well, first of all, woohoo!
Yay.
So exciting. And this is a safe space. We can say cancer free. I'm not a doctor. I know.
Right. You're not a neuro-oncologist. You call it what you will.
Exactly. Okay, so, obviously this is a financial show. And as I said in the opening, part of the reason why I absolutely wanted to have someone with a catastrophic medical event on is because, as you're describing what happened and the medical, emotional, having to call loved ones, your husband, all of that kind of stuff, kind of in the background of it in the US, as opposed to most other developed countries, there's also just sort of like a clock, a financial clock that's just now spinning. And I think for a lot of people, if they've been lucky enough to not have a serious medical event in their lives that, that even if it is perhaps planned for, it can still be financially devastating, but especially an unexpected one. They don't really realize how quickly the numbers can just skyrocket and get to, people. I mean, medical bankruptcy is one of the leading causes of bankruptcy in the country. And it's also something that, yet, despite how much of an issue it is, I think so many people kind of walk around ignorant to, or lucky, sort of blissfully unaware of what people are dealing with, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Can you talk a little bit about the financial aspect, A, from a perspective of where you were with it financially, like what your insurance was covering, what it wasn't, and B, just the mental load and process of navigating the finances of this process of navigating the finances of cancer as you're dealing with it?
Oh, sure. I could talk for hours and hours about that. So we are very fortunate because my husband works for a big company and they have great insurance. I lead a small nonprofit in Nashville and we do not have health insurance. So this would be a very different conversation if his employer did not provide insurance. So I'll say this, I am very thankful for our insurance, and I also want to burn the insurance industry down and start over with patience in mind. Right off the bat, right? I think everybody knows going to the emergency room is not cheap. And I was joking with the people who were doing my MRI of like, what's this going to run us? Does anybody know if our insurance covers this? One thing that I didn't know was that you may be in network at the hospital, but the person who reads your radiology report may not be in network, or the person who does this scan, or the person that does your anesthesia for your biopsy or whatever. You don't really have an opportunity, or you are not in the mindset to think, is every single person that's going to touch this case in my network? And so we found that to be I found it to be alarming because we had instances where people were and they weren't in our network, and those bills were drastically different. I think one of the initial bills that we got was like $8,000 from the emergency room. And I'd call my insurance company, I would call the medical billing office at the hospital, and I would get two very different answers of what I actually owed. The medical billers were like, yes, you absolutely owe $8,000. And the insurance would say, no, you owe $800. And so I'd call, they were not really talking. I was trying to call and figure it out. I was very stressed out about this. I'm a person who likes to pay bills and pay them on time. And, the medical billing office were sending me things like, we're going to send you to collections. But the person I was talking to was saying, just wait, because we think it hasn't made it all the way through the insurance cycle yet. That happened over and over and over. I just found this notebook when I was preparing for this conversation, and just page after page after page of notes that I was spending hours and hours and hours with the insurance and with medical billing people, trying to figure out what I owed, what I didn't owe, what bills I should really pay, which I shouldn't pay. And I can tell you, I was in a stressful situation already. I was in between being diagnosed with brain cancer and having an awake craniotomy. And in between that, I was trying to figure out, how much money we owe to who. And it was, there's got to be a better way. That's what I'll say about that. I don't know what the better way is, but I hope there's somebody working on that.
Sure is. Okay, so do you know now that you are stable? Are you able to look back and say, this is the totality of what my cancer cost, and this is what I paid out of pocket?
I think we probably paid about $20,000 out of pocket with a good insurance. Because, if you can go, and I have 4 MRIs a year. And I have 4 visits with my neuro-oncologist, and also have, however many visits with my endocrinologist because of my thyroid cancer. And it's great if you have a scan in December and you've met your deductible and your out of pocket max and all these things, all these terms that don't make a lot of sense to me as a person who doesn't work in insurance. But if that scan is January 1st instead of December 31st, there's a very different cost for that. Um, so I would guess we paid about $20,000 out of pocket.
And how much was the total cost? Do you know?
Mm. Oh gosh. I bet the awake craniotomy itself was $200,000 maybe or more. I don't have a I'm pretty sure I burned all of those bills after a while because they were so stressful to look at. But yeah, and then I stayed in the neuro ICU after that. I had a lot of very particular scans. This is a good insurance story, actually. So right after I was diagnosed, I was at one hospital in Nashville, and they told me, we don't do the kind of surgery that you need to have done. They said you need to go to San Francisco or Phoenix to the Barrow Institute or somewhere. And in the meantime, I was getting connected with the head of the neurosurgery department at Vanderbilt University, which is like 10 minutes from our house. And so we met with the head of the neurosurgery department at Vanderbilt. He's fantastic. His name's Dr. Reed Thompson. And I hope I never have to recommend a neurosurgeon to friends, but if I do, he's fantastic. But we met with him and he said, okay, so your tumor, it's like right here, and it's in the Wernicke's area of your brain, which is your communications area. And everything that is that you do communications wise is connected into this tumor or right around where the tumor is. So speaking and understanding what you're saying and all those things. And he wanted to do a functional MRI, which it's wild. It was a 2.5 hour MRI. And I was reading and I was looking at different lines of code to see if they matched. I was finishing sentences all in my brain, and they were mapping the blood flow for each different communication function to see how close it was to my tumor. That's not a cheap scan to do in any way, but he really wanted this because when he was taking the tumor out, he didn't want to affect the way or my ability to speak or my ability to understand whatever. So this was really an important piece of the process before my surgery. So he orders this. Let's say I met with him, let's say on a Tuesday. He ordered this for a Saturday. On Friday, Robert, my husband, and I were in our pediatrician's office talking to him about how do we tell our young kids about mom has a brain tumor and she's going to have surgery and all this stuff. And I get a call from the MRI office and they say, hey, you have this scan on Saturday. We want you to know that your insurance has denied this claim or denied coverage. So you're going to have to, they may do it later, but they're not accepting this now. You're going to have to check a box and sign a piece of paper that says you will pay for this out of pocket, this 2.5 hour specialized MRI. And I remember being like, well, what does it cost? And they said, we don't know. So that's part of the problem, right? Like I couldn't even have any idea if I checked that box, if it was going to be $500 or $10,000. And so I said, let's cancel it for now until the insurance settles, and then I'll do it. And then I get a call immediately from my neurosurgeon, and he was like, Olivia, did you cancel that MRI? And I said, yeah, I did. I'm not checking that box because nobody can tell me how much it costs. Right? I mean, you're talking about medical bankruptcy. Who knows, right? I don't know where you're even signing up for. And he said, well, I've been on the phone with insurance. They've hung up on me 3 times. I'm pacing around my house. All my family's here. I've done a peer-to-peer review, and they finally said they would cover it. Will you go? And I was like, yes, of course I will go. I didn't want to go because don't want to do the MRI. I didn't want to sign the paper that said, you'll cover this full cost out of pocket. There were a lot of stuff like that went on that just adds to the stress that you're feeling. and it feels unnecessary.
That's insane, first and foremost. What's striking to me, okay, so first of all, paying $20,000 out of pocket, like obviously you guys were able to weather that, as unpleasant as I'm sure it was. For a lot of people, that in and of itself would be financially ruinous. And that's assuming you have really good insurance. I mean, did you guys have how did you guys navigate all of the, not just the out of pocket expenses for the medical stuff, but I assume there were tons of outside costs. I mean, I'm sure childcare was an issue. I'm sure you probably had to miss some work. Like there were just probably so many financial issues that came up as a result of this. How did you guys kind of navigate that from a budget perspective? What were the conversations you were having?
Yeah. I think we are very fortunate. We both have good jobs, and we're able to, we didn't have to pay it all at once. There were little by little, bill by bill. Um, Also, I have been saving a lot of money at the time because we were trying to buy a house. We were actively trying to buy a house. And the market here in Nashville in 2021 was awful anyway. So we kind of got saved there, but, um, we just used a lot of that. And we just delayed buying a house by a couple of years. It was, and then we had a lot of people who helped us in other ways. Like you said, it's not just the medical bills. I couldn't drive. They said that those symptoms I was having at the beginning, my vision and my hands, could be seizures. I learned a lot that seizures are not just shaking on the floor and kind of what you see in the movies, seizures. There's a lot of different things and symptoms there. But because they were maybe seizures, they didn't let me drive a car for, I think it was like 4 or 5 months. And that gets expensive. I mean, my husband drove me around a lot. My friends drove me around a lot, but I also Ubered a lot. And people were so good to us. People were very thoughtful in the ways that they supported us. We didn't do a GoFundMe because I didn't feel like we needed that. And, I wanted people to save their money for people that really like that was going to keep them out of bankruptcy or keep them in their house or keep their kids in daycare. Um, but one really helpful tip somebody gave me at the beginning of this was write down like 3 or 4 things that are very helpful for when people want to say, how can I help? These are ways that you actually need help and that are easy for people to do. And so that was great. I wrote down like Uber gift cards, grocery store gift cards, whatever. I have a friend who started or collected some money and they hired people to clean our house for us, which is not something that we did very often. I could go on about that, but so those Uber gift cards were super helpful in me getting to work and getting home from work and getting to, all the things I needed to do. And to avoid, and my husband he's a recruiter, a financial recruiter. And so he, time is money for him. He is on a commission-based compensation. And so anytime that we were taking him out of work was costing us money, basically.
I want to take a quick pause and thank today's sponsor, ZocDoc. If there's one thing you should take the time to actually do well, it's find yourself a good doctor, whether it's for your mental health, a regular checkup, a dentist, or whatever. And finding the right doctor should not be an overwhelming task. It should be the opposite. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare highly rated in-network doctors near you and instantly book appointments with them online. If for whatever reason you're not feeling your best, finding the right care shouldn't take up all your time and energy. That's where ZocDoc comes in to help. Using their free app that millions of users like myself rely on, you can find the right doctor that meets your needs and fits your busy schedule. I've personally been using ZocDoc for years, and it is literally how I find all of my doctors and how I can always be sure to hit the right balance between someone who fits my schedule and someone who meets my needs. Shout out to my dentist. I love you. And I used to be really, really afraid of the dentist, so that's a big thing for me. Here in New York City, some doctors are booked up for weeks, if not months in advance, and that's not particularly helpful when you have something that needs timely attention. With ZocDoc, you can book an appointment with a few taps in their app. Choose from thousands of patient-reviewed doctors and specialists, browse doctor profiles, upload and verify your insurance information, and get the care you need in one place. Go to ZocDoc.com/TFC and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/TFC. ZocDoc.com/TFC. I mean, just from like a purely kind of functional perspective, while going through all of this, how did you keep it together? I mean, emotionally, at work, like, I mean, I'm listening to this and I'm like, if I, first of all, am diagnosed with a brain tumor, I'm waiting to have surgery while I'm awake, and I have to like basically go into like a full on labyrinth anytime I want to figure out what something costs and what I'm going to owe and what I'm agreeing to when I sign a piece of paper. Like, I don't know, it's hard not to just feel like you would just walk out into the street and just start screaming because of the stress and the pressure. So, how did you kind of manage from an emotional, functional perspective?
My friends who will watch this, I'm sure will laugh at your question because they know what I'm going to say. But I didn't. I did not keep it together for a while.
Good.
Part of me got into this. I had a lot of adrenaline around it. I got into this like warrior mindset where I was working out a lot. I had been working out, but then I was going to like this intense like boot camp situation that didn't. And then I started going to a personal trainer, which friends paid for that, which was amazing, because I wanted to be in the best shape I could be in before going into that surgery. I just had this like mindset where I was like walking into a fight or a war or something, and I wanted to be in great shape. I wanted to be as healthy as I could be. So I started eating really healthy. I started working out a lot, and that was very helpful. I walked a lot in the morning before anybody woke up. I very intentionally, when I was going on those walks, would name things I was grateful for, like the good things that were happening in my life. And that sounds super cheesy, but I would say, like, I'm grateful my kids have shoes. I'm grateful that we have air conditioning. I'm grateful that, it was like little things that you forget about that you have that maybe other people don't. So that was helpful. I did lose my mind a bit. I will say, especially during radiation. I had to drive to Vanderbilt every morning at like 8 o'clock in the morning. They would strap me to a table. I had a cage over my face where you can't even blink your eyes. It was so tight. And they would burn off, I mean, all under here, there's no hair. They would burn your scalp. And I was just full of rage. And the way that the rage came out was I would yell at smokers. I would roll down my window. This is so bad. This is not typical of my personality, just yelling at strangers. But for some reason, I was so mad at people who were smoking cigarettes. And I think after lots of therapy, I figured out that I was like fighting so hard for my life and my health. And there were people who seemed to be kind of throwing it away in a way that I could see. Um, that's when I started going to therapy, is when my husband and my friends were like, please stop yelling at strangers. And I was like, I can't help it. I don't know. It just, something comes over me and I'm so mad in the moment. So in some ways I was like making gratitude lists. In some ways I was like yelling at strangers. So, you know,
I think both are great. I support and endorse both strategies, and I think they're both necessary.
I don't recommend it. I did go to therapy after that. And that's a whole thing too, right? Like I was trying to keep myself together. I was a mom. I had a full-time job, a wife. I had life going on, and I started to lose it. I started to yell at people, and I started asking around for recommendations for a therapist. I had not been seeing one before. And that whole thing was just as maddening as the insurance. I mean, I was trying to find a therapist that took my insurance, which was impossible at the time. I don't know if that's changed since then. Everybody I talked to wanted to do Zoom meetings, and I did not. Our house was not big enough for me to say the things I needed to say on a Zoom call. I need to go somewhere else and let it out. Um, I didn't find anybody under $150 an hour. And then all of that, there was nobody who had time in their schedule to see me. I was crying on the phone with these people saying, I need to be in therapy. They're like, I'm sorry, we're booked. And finally, I found a great person, and she was awesome and cured me from yelling at people for the most part.
So you are screaming at strangers free. We can say that.
For, mostly, yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, if I yell at you, it's just like there's a really good reason.
I mean, the thing is though, you say that like that is something that you were like, okay, I got to go to a therapist and stop this. And for the record, I mean, perhaps I am taking this a certain way as a person who does occasionally smoke a cigarette. But maybe they're not necessarily the best object because we all kind of do things that are bad for us, and that theirs just happens to be more
I
visible
don't
or
think that way now about people who smoke cigarettes. Like you do you. And I thought that before, but for some reason, like my rage was just coming out in very specific ways.
no, no.
And anyway, yeah, I don't want anybody to listen to this and think that, that's how I feel about people who smoke cigarettes now. I know lots of lovely people who do.
No, I mean, listen, I think first of all, I think anything that you do in such an extraordinary moment of stress is totally understandable, and also like I said, I think we all, most of us, very few of us could look at all of our life choices and say that we don't do a few things that probably aren't very good for us. However, I do think that the sort of natural inclination to look at that kind of behavior as something that needs to be curbed, or something that's not who I am, I shouldn't be doing this. Like for me, I when it comes to these big macro issues like how broken our healthcare system is and everything you're describing, part of me often feels like it's not going to get better until we're all screaming in the street about how unacceptable it is. And, maybe we pivot slightly from the man smoking outside a bar to like, the Pfizer or whatever, and start sort of directing it that way a little bit, or frankly, most politicians who are in bed with all of these predatory industries. But, you know, for you, when, because I know you're very, very passionate about the financial aspect of this, and making being sick something that doesn't financially devastate people, how do you kind of balance not wanting to feel consumed by negative feelings with having that sort of righteous anger that does motivate you, in a positive way?
Mm. Um, I did find a more positive way for it to deal with it. I had such I've said this before. It was like a year-long adrenaline rush for me, and some of it was really positive and great, and some of it was, not so great. But one thing I kept noticing, I went to the cancer center at Vanderbilt so many times. I had to go every day for radiation. I went for my scans. I went for blood work. I went to see my oncologist. The whole thing. And I started noticing that there were people there, and this is just a big assumption, but people there that probably did not have the community surrounding them and supporting them in the way that we did. I saw specifically one day I was sitting by a man, and he walked in with a grocery bag, and it looked like a lot of his belongings were in there. And he was also in the cancer center. He was also going through something crazy stressful. And I just started thinking about like how do I replicate this feeling of this community support that we had? And we had immense community support. We had friends that did just amazing things for us, set up meal trains. I had a friend who called and said, "Hey, our kids have a school project due on Friday, and I'm just going to do Sam's for you. I'm going to turn it in on Friday." And I was like, fantastic. Or we had some more friends that I got on this really strict diet for a while, and they hired a private chef for us for 2 weeks after my surgery so I could stay on that diet. We had friends show up and throw a pep rally in our front yard 2 days before my surgery. They sang songs, they had balloons, they had signs. It was incredible. I mean, I had no idea. I just gotten out of the shower, and my friend says, "Put on some clothes and come outside." And there were like 50 people in our yard singing and like cheering for us. And so I had such a grateful heart because of that. I could go on for a long time about all the good ways that people helped us. And then kind of seeing that there are people that are going through something just as stressful as I, or just as bad, or just as scary as we were, and may not have that community that's able to support them like that. So I started asking around. I met with some people at Vanderbilt and I said, what can I do with this? What can I do with this community that's still asking us every day, how can we help? What can we do? How can I point them towards somebody else where we can like gather around somebody or just take care of them in some way? So we started a brain cancer patients fund at Vanderbilt. And so now there's a pot of, I think we were out to like $41,000. My oncologist or my surgeon or any of those great nurses that I worked with could identify somebody who is struggling financially, who might be on the brink of medical bankruptcy, or they know that they don't live in Nashville and they're coming to Vanderbilt and there's a lot of transportation needs. They can support those patients with this fund. And it's like a dream come true for me. Like all of this bad stuff, right? Like getting diagnosed and having that awful, crazy surgery and all the things I went through, like there could be something good and positive that came out of that. So we threw a fundraiser. It was a karaoke party. It was a lot of fun. We had about 120 people that showed up to it. We raised all the money. It still exists, the fund, and I hope to just keep it going. And it just is very heartwarming to me and very, it kind of it's nothing will make this process, this whole thing I've been through worth it. But to think about that one day somebody will learn that there's this group of strangers, there's these people that have been through this before that are saying, we've got you, you're not alone. We'll take care of this with you. That's it for me.
Well, first of all, that's lovely. And I want to go to that karaoke party. That sounds very fun.
It's a lot of fun.
um, One thing I wanted to ask you, you're someone who seems so kind of put together and dynamic, and you're doing so many things and you have so many identities. I know for a lot of people, especially when an illness is very serious, potentially life-threatening, a big part of the struggle emotionally and mentally is being viewed as a sick person, having the identity of a sick person. I'm interested how someone like yourself, who, as you said, went into such a kind of warrior mentality, how you navigated that perception and that identity kind of being placed on you.
That's a great question. That was really hard for me because my identity was, I was a mom and I do this in the community and this is my job and, whatever. And then suddenly, and this is something I really didn't appreciate about this process. I put a post out there when I was in the hospital initially, kind of at the end of that, because people were starting to find out, and I just wanted to own what the narrative was about what was happening to me. And I put a post on Facebook, and I would say within a few days, I had probably 150 Facebook requests of people I didn't know. And that felt so gross to me. And it just felt like people were like, oh, this is something that we can watch. Let's watch what happens with this girl who's got this crazy medical thing happening. And I hated that so much. I decided then and there, I wasn't going to post, I'm going to the doctor today. I have a scan today. I wasn't going to post every medical detail because it felt like I was suddenly on some sort of reality show, and I am not a reality show kind of gal anyway. So I was like, this is not it for me. Now there were a lot of people who were following along and wanted to know what was going on for, very good reasons. They were super helpful, but I did not like that spotlight. And I think that was part of what I wanted to do with that party that I threw and that fund was like, I'm in this spotlight that I don't want to be in anyway, but what can we do with this attention, right? People are paying attention to what's happening in my life more so than ever. Nobody cares otherwise. And so if people are here and people are with me and people are, checking in, like, let's take this from me and put this somewhere else.
It's really interesting you said that about feeling gross from the attention. I will say, I bet some of the people who wanted to follow you might have been people going through it themselves. So maybe they weren't all, voyeurs. But I do really understand what you're saying as someone who is, has been visible on the internet for a long time, for basically my whole adult life. And there are a lot of aspects of my life that I've never shown. I don't really talk about my family. My husband's never appeared. He's never, he doesn't even use social media. I've posted pictures of him, but like he's never, participated in anything. And there's just a lot of stuff that am kind of more private about, but it's undeniable that when you look at what kind of works and what people really respond to, I think about, for example, like on YouTube, it's almost like a genre within itself, the like we broke up video, or like, telling my truth about X, Y, or Z. And you know, it's always an interesting balance, because I do think that on the one hand, creating communities where people can feel free to show their full humanity and to talk about things that might be difficult, I think there's a real beauty in it, right? I mean, like, for example, infertility went from something that's extremely private and stigmatized to something that, people can be much more honest about now and form communities around, and talk about more openly. And I think the same can be true for a lot of illness and a lot of tragedy. Grief is another big one that I think has become a topic. However, it is interesting to me how when people begin to share some of those aspects, often it becomes the only thing people really want to see from you, or the way that you're kind of identified. And if you choose to be more private in the future, that, is something that people now feel kind of entitled to. And I'm kind of interested when you see other people, and, whether it's within their own private circles or more publicly online, who are kind of sharing their journey with something similar to what you went through. Can you talk about what helped you to see and engage with as someone going through it, to sort of give a little bit of guidance for, what is really beneficial and constructive to share?
Mm. That's a good point. And there are a lot of people who share their journey, and I'm just not I'm not an online kind of person. I don't share a lot of, I mean, I share things that are funny that are happening with my family or whatever, but that's just not my persona naturally. So it didn't come naturally to me. It felt like a false identity for me to share a lot about that. Um, I think that people do, and they get a lot of feedback, and there are a lot of, they may get some different energy out of that wasn't the case for me. What was very helpful for me were when people would connect me one-on-one with people who had been through something really similar. I met with a guy named Justin, who's awesome, who's a friend of, or actually married to a friend and old coworker, Judith. And we sat down for coffee, and he had a very similar kind of brain cancer. And for me to sit across from him and him to say, okay, this is what surgery is going to be like, and this is what radiation is like, and this is how I felt during the day for radiation, and this is, you may feel like working, and maybe you'll take off like a half a day a week or something after. That was so helpful to have somebody who had been through something really similar. And I think you can connect with people online about that. I've been connected to afterwards, and I will always do this, but there's been so many people that know that this happened to me and have connected. I just texted with a friend this morning whose dad is having an awake craniotomy next week. I will always, always, always spend time with them and talk with them or meet with them or text with them and share everything that happened on my journey and happened, day to day, the little things. Like I told him, when you get home, you may want a travel pillow to sleep with so you don't roll over on the staples on your head. Like they may not tell you that at the hospital. But that's more impactful for me personally, is to connect one-on-one versus whatever. I know this is on a podcast of a person who has a lot of followers, so that may not make sense now, but day to day, that's what's more impactful for me.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I don't think there's any one right or wrong answer. I think, ultimately, obviously I'm in the business of creating communities around people talking openly more about money online, obviously. But I do obviously believe there's a huge value in it, but it is interesting to your point to think about the ways in which we may be unintentionally exploiting people who do have these things in their lives. For example, I can think of a woman I followed her on TikTok for a long time, um, who I followed her prior to her husband passing very, very unexpectedly. And then he passed away basically instantly, unexpectedly. And obviously, overnight, her pretty large platform, which prior to that had been about personal style and whatever, became essentially a grief diary. And it's really interesting watching kind of the evolution of that as she gets closer to a year anniversary of her husband's passing. And she responded to a comment a while back about, I think she was posting again about style stuff. And I think some of the people following her, because as you pointed out, she got a humongous influx of people who joined after she began talking about her grief journey. And now there's a level of expectation that that is what she has to offer people. Um, and she had mentioned, the point of, working through grief is to work through it so that you can live your life and not be defined by this thing. And I imagine maybe part of, you not wanting to overly share about it, aside from not having, that much of a sharing instinct to begin with, is also a desire not to be overly identified by it.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I see people occasionally that I haven't seen in a long time who are kind of shocked that I'm just a normal person now, that I'm out and about and I'm with my kids, or I coach both of their basketball teams this year, or go to work every day. And they're like, wow, you look really great. I'm like, yeah, this is just who I am. I have you're right. It's not an identity that I want. Nobody wants it, right? Nobody wants for somebody to say you have cancer, or you have a brain tumor, or you have whatever. And so I think people just handle that in different ways. I don't think there's a good way or a bad way to do that. But for me, I wanted to share. I did, I occasionally shared what was going on. I have surgery tomorrow. I am grateful for my friends who did this. I've made it through radiation. I've made it through chemo. It was really helpful to have people support us when we planned the karaoke party and raised a bunch of money. But it was just, the internet can be really helpful and really not helpful, especially when it diagnoses you with a migraine and you have a brain tumor.
WebMD, all you like to do is tell people they have cancer until they actually do. And then you tell them it's just a headache, silly. As a last question, for people, not from a health perspective, because frankly, everyone's situation is so unique. There's really, I'm sure, no universal advice that could be given. There probably wasn't much that you could have done to, prevent what happened to you, obviously, or to have caught it earlier. And actually, on that note, Hank Green recently did a really, really good breakdown about why people don't just like go get MRIs and full body scans and things like that on an ongoing basis. And we'll link that in the description. But from a financial perspective, for people who are in a similar situation that you were, so to say, have insurance, take generally pretty good care of themselves, are probably pretty on top of things with regards to their checkups and whatnot. Is there anything that, looking back, you wish you would have done differently financially to be in a better position if something did happen medically?
We were in good shape because we were planning to buy a house, right? Like that was what saved us from this being catastrophic financially for us. We also had health insurance. We both have life insurance, which is something that came into play, when you're going into a major surgery. You want to make sure that if something happens, that your family's taken care of. So I was glad that I had gotten that before and gotten it before I was sick. I don't know that anybody would, that life insurance would be easy to get for me currently. Um, I don't know. I think that I will say this: when you are in the middle of something like in your mailbox is full of medical bills every day, like ours was, my best advice is to wait. I'm usually a person who likes to pay bills as soon as I get them. It stresses me out. I'll like wake up in the middle of the night if I think about if I owe somebody any money. Um, but my best advice is to wait. Hold on to your bills, make notes on them, be in touch with your insurance company, be in touch with medical billers, but don't pay them right away. Those bills will change and change and change. And if you pay them right away, it can take you a long time to be reimbursed, to get your money back if you overpaid. I was just talking to my friend Kristen last night, who is in her third round of breast cancer. And in the one of the previous rounds, she was like me and wanted to just pay her bills as they came in. And after the rush of it, after the treatments, and they could kind of settle in and figure out what happened, kind of do a accounting of what they paid and what they didn't. They found out they paid $5,700 extra over. They overpaid $5,700. And they called the hospital and they said, too bad. That was their first response. It's been too long. Sorry. And they threatened to get an attorney. They called and called, it was just such a mess. I think it took them a year and they got most of it back, but they didn't get it all back. So that's a bit of advice. Hold on to your bills, be very organized with them. I had a whole binder, I'm looking at it right now, that I just found with medical bills I would put into the binder. I would date when I got them. I would make notes about my calls with them. And when it felt like it was finally settled, I would pay it. Yeah, I don't know that anybody thinks that something like this will happen to them, and I hope it doesn't, but there will be something, right? It may not be medical. It will be a car wreck, or it will be tuition for your kid's school, or it will be something that is a overwhelmingly high number that you will need to pay. And so you are the one that should be giving this advice, but to have that emergency fund ready. Our emergency fund was under the title of house fund, but having some cash kind of stowed away, that when this happens, the most stressful part is not financial. You can not worry about that, and you can take care of yourself, and you can go do what you need to do to be healthy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I will always co-sign having a really strong emergency fund. Olivia, thank you so much for joining us. Is there, if you're currently running a fundraiser or anything that people could donate to, could you just share what that is, and we'll link it below?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fund still exists. I hope it always will. It's called Brain Cancer Patients Assistance Fund. It's at Vanderbilt. I've sent you over the link for you, but that fund will, like I said, if somebody walks in and is diagnosed with brain cancer, like I was, and they are overwhelmed by everything and also by the medical bills or by anything else financial happening in their life, this fund will take away a bit of that burden. So I'm very thankful for everybody who's given to that, or who might consider giving to that, because that means a lot to me.
Wonderful. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you all at home for tuning in, and we will see you back here next week on an all-new episode of The Financial Confessions. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in next week for an all-new episode of The Financial Confessions. The Financial Confessions is created by The Financial Diet and hosted by me, Chelsea Fagan. It is produced by Alexa Brooks Major and Holly Trantham. Recording and editing by Emily Fisher, and music and sound effects are from Epidemic Sound. Want more of our content? Head over to our YouTube page, The Financial Diet, to see our monthly deep dives, videos of this show, and our entire backlog of videos and podcasts. I'll talk to you next week.